It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker here at the Community Vision stage to talk about how policy builds communities. Becca Balint is our state senator. She was selected to serve as the Senate's majority leader this last biennium, and we hope she's going to continue into the next one, leading not just our community, but also our state towards a brighter future and stronger communities. She lives right up the street here, walkable to downtown Brattleboro, and runs around everywhere with her small, sprightly children, which is the essence of community, walkable, livable spaces. Katie Buckley, our Commissioner on Housing, was appointed by Phil Scott to serve as Commissioner in the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Under her leadership, the Vermont Community Development Program, Housing and Mobile Home Parks, not Heim Parks, and the Division for Historic Preservation, Community Planning, and Revitalization. She has served a broad range of roles, not just in Montpelier and statewide, but also right up the road in her hometown of Guilford. So it is really so special here in Vermont that we can have people who think statewide, who think nationally, to come here and talk about their very own communities and the intersection of policy and community development. So thank you very much. I'd like to welcome two hometown heroes on this lovely Saturday morning. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing your speech.
Thank you, Emily. Could I just have a quick show of hands of how many Vermonters we have under the tent today? Okay, great. Actually, I think I'm going to take this out. As many of you already know, we are experiencing a housing crisis, a housing shortage throughout Vermont. And it's really at all levels of the economy, all communities. There are very few places in Vermont where there is enough affordable housing for the people who live there. This has many, many reasons for that. One is our aging housing stock. One is the fact, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, which is that we have a shortage of places where folks can age in place, so that there is not an easy succession of homes that people can age into in a community. Now, numerous community organizations have done assessments in the last decade about what we think we need in terms of numbers of new housing units in order to meet the need. So the Vermont Futures Project set a growth target rate of 5,000 new and improved housing units annually. The 2017 Roadmap to End Homelessness in Vermont called for 368 new units of permanent supportive housing, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and over 1,200 new homes for low-income Vermonters over the next 5 years. And finally, the 2015 statewide housing assessment by Bowen National Research Group identified 3 key needs for our state: more affordable housing for households below 30% of median income, more available housing stock for households between 80 and 120% of median income, and more available housing across the income spectrum to relieve downward pressure on the entire system. What I mean by that is when my wife and I looked for a home here in Brattleboro, the housing market was very tight, and we ended up purchasing a home, a 100-year-old home up on South Main Street. And we took up a home that a family of more modest means should have moved into, because we could have afforded a more expensive home in the next bracket, but there wasn't one available. So we are conscious of that, and it happens throughout Vermont. You take the home that's available to you, even if it isn't perhaps the right home for your family at that time, and you try to make it work. So Commissioner Buckley and I like to do these events together because we work across the political aisle. Commissioner Buckley is a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but we see housing really, really similarly. That it's at the nexus of so many of our issues. Yes, thank you for applauding. It's really important because you can't get anything done. You really can't unless you come together to talk. And we always joke that there were a number of times when it felt like the discussions were breaking down, and she and I would go and find a quiet room in the State House and say, okay, how are we going to navigate this? Because we need a $100 million housing bond, and damn it, we're going to get it. 35 million parlayed into 100 million with state and federal.
Absolutely.
I know. I'm prone to hyperbole.
No. That's it leveraged 100.
It leveraged 100 million. And so yesterday, she and I were at the groundbreaking for the Great Terrace Community Project in northern Brattleboro.
Does everybody know the old Lamplighter Motel?
You've smelled it.
Yeah. Have you eaten at Panda North? Because it's right next door. And it was a dilapidated old, and there'll be someone right after us talking about that project if you want to hear more details about it, but it's an excellent example.
So we were there yesterday, and it was an amazing rehab of these buildings. It's going to be, I believe, 22 units of not just affordable housing, but supported housing, meaning the people in those apartments will have the services that they need to be successful. In the middle of this new neighborhood is the most gorgeous tree connecting these two units. And right in front of the tree is a beautiful community space. That community space was paid for in part by this housing bond that we were able to get through. I mention these two things because the tree and the community space were two things that I thought about when I left that housing project yesterday that felt like they are critical to the people who are going to be living here. So we want to talk to you today about what are those other critical things that we need to be thinking about in housing policy. And I'm going to turn it over now to Commissioner Buckley so that she can tell you a few of the things that she's thinking about and help us frame this discussion, because we really want to hear from you about what are the components that are not currently in our discussions on housing that need to be in order to make our housing projects accessible and workable for the people who are going to access them. So Commissioner Buckley?
Thanks, Senator Balint. I appreciate that intro there. Welcome, everybody, today. We're so glad you're here. We understand that policy might not be the most stimulating discussion that you'll see on this stage, but there can be a lot of really interesting aspects of it. So thanks for coming out today and being here. My primary goal as housing commissioner is to create more units of housing. We, as the senator mentioned, we have an extremely tight market here, and when there's an extremely tight market, it causes our housing to be really expensive. So, using the programs that we have available, the tools that we have at the state, we're trying to maximize our public dollars to create the most amount of housing opportunities, whether that's for multifamily rental housing or that's home ownership. How do we do that? And one of the things that we would really love to see in creating these new units of housing is really taking the focus off the eye of the individual and the development side of it, and putting a C for community, that when we're creating these developments, how are they intentional and contemplating the needs of the community in that? So when you're creating a multifamily housing project that the senator mentioned, or you're placing your home somewhere, whether it's a larger scale home or it's a tiny house, how does that impact your community? What are you adding in terms of value to your community, and how can we create communities that are more inclusive?
And so we were discussing earlier this idea of is it the Blueline Communities?
How many people know what a blue zone is?
Blue Zone, excuse me.
Okay. Yeah. So for those of you who don't, blue zones are those areas in the world that have the highest concentration of centenarians. So people living to be 100 years of age or more, basically aging together. And they have two things in common. One is that they have plant-based diets, which doesn't fall as much in my bailiwick under my government role. But the other is that they live in community. So these folks live together, they grow old together, and that's something that we don't necessarily do well, I think in general, in this country. So how do we create communities where seniors get to stay and age in place in their community that they're from, versus going to the senior home or supported living in another town, or where those resources are available for those folks? They have to leave their community and leave their family, their friends, their network. So how do we bring seniors in? How do we keep families in? By offering resources for multifamily that includes childcare. How do we weave all of those important things into our policies and strategies around housing?
And so we do not have much time in which to have this discussion. We're ending at 11:25, correct? So we have 10 minutes. And I know that we have some ideas of what should be included in our discussion that we're going to bring back to the executive branch, and I'm going to be back to the legislative branch. In addition to being the majority leader in the Senate, I also serve on the Senate Economic Development and Housing Committee. So we want to hear from you in the next 10 minutes. What are we not thinking about that we should be thinking about in terms of housing projects here in Vermont? This is a wonderful opportunity here at this fest, and this is, I think, my third or fourth year being here. Commissioner Buckley and I were here last year. It is a place where ideas are being generated, and we really want you to think broadly about the notion of community and smallness and how you turn that into larger concepts that serve all members of our community and not just the people inhabiting those small houses or those small apartments. So I see some questions, which is exciting.
And slightly scary.
So how are you going to do this?
I'm going to read some questions.
You're going to read some questions, okay?
But I have a question. You asked the question, and I have a suggestion. One of the really, really important things that we're not thinking about is multi-generational and multi-income.
Multi-generational and multi-income, and you are singing our song. Please speak to that.
We mentioned the housing bond, $35 million housing bond that's leveraging $100 million into our statewide economy. One of the aspects of the housing bond is that there are requirements in it for all income levels up to 120% area median income. So more and more, what we are trying to really push forth in policy is that mixed income, multi-generational housing creates the healthiest outcomes. So, yes.
Agreed. Yes. So Emily, they're going rogue, so.
Going in. This didn't work as well the first time, so I wasn't quite prepared for it to work. Thank you for your questions and your curiosity and your interest. This is exciting, and it seems maybe a two-person job and not a one-person job. So, a challenge that someone brought up is what do second homes look like in terms of the challenge for building the livable, connected communities that you're talking about? How do second homes impact that?
Well, so one thing that I'm thinking about in terms of second home, because we are very much in the middle, it's amazing that I'm here today because I've been back and forth to Montpelier for weeks. We still don't have a budget. We're coming down to the end game, July 1st. If we don't get a budget, we're going to have a government shutdown, the first time ever in Vermont. And we're working hard to avert that. One of the sticking points is the issue around tax rates for people who are permanent residents and tax rates for people who are second homeowners. And it is gumming up the works in a big way. And so it's top of mind for me. One of the things that I'm thinking about in southern Vermont is that there are communities in which that is a very important component of the work that planners are doing. And so here in Brattleboro, it's not, in my neighborhood in Brattleboro, it's not a big part. I wonder, Katie, if you could speak to that.
And I think it's important to recognize that second homeowners, I think we sort of lump people into, it's either your primary residence or your second home. But in that are multifamily rentals. So it might not be a mansion by a resort. It could be a multifamily rental because we only split our taxes into the homestead rate and the non-residential rate. And in that non-residential rate are all of those multifamily housing that provides a lot of affordable housing that's not publicly funded in the state of Vermont. So it's a really complicated discussion. And so you have genuine second homes, but you also have, it's not your primary residence, but it's a multifamily property. So it's complicated.
If I could, I'd love to know who asked the question, because I want to make sure that we're understanding your question so I can bring it back, because I don't feel like I necessarily understand how it fits in, but I want to.
So I'm going to
second homeowners are coming up from other parts of New England for the weekend, occupying homes that could be lived in by people who want to live in the community.
Yeah, and it's, I don't need to tell you, I'm sure you understand that's also impacting our population in our schools, because there are many communities in Windham County for which that is true. There are families that want to move there. There is not available housing, and we see the decline of enrollment in the schools. So I would like to talk to you afterwards. It's a great question. I'm not sure how it intersects with a policy discussion as opposed to local decisions, but let's continue that after this conversation.
Thank you. And I heard from Commissioner Buckley, it sounds like we need to do a little more research to really separate out those two categories of housing if we want to make decisions about this question. That was sort of the microphones right there, that little addition. The next question is, there's an acute shortage of affordable land zoned for multifamily habitation due to the impact of Irene and the closing of mobile home parks due to obsolete and inadequate infrastructure. Are there, hold it, wait, initiatives to reclaim or redevelop land to provide for better trailers, including tiny housing? So to summarize, I think, we're asking about, are there initiatives or policies that are moving forward to support mobile home parks or land use similar to mobile home parks?
So one of the challenges with mobile home parks here in southern Vermont is, and it's not just, it's true in the Barre area as well, is they have been traditionally built on some of the cheapest land, which tends to be in flood zone areas. And so we are coming up against this constantly in my committee. How do you replace those affordable homes that people actually want as a viable option of home ownership? How do you continue to make that a possibility for many modest income Vermonters when the land that most of these have been built on is no longer land that is considered a safe place to build on? And so we see that here in Brattleboro as well. And so I know it's a struggle for us to allocate money for reclaiming land in other parts of the state to have additional units for mobile housing units. But I'm wondering, Katie, if you know of any specific within your...
Not at the state level, excuse me. It really takes place more on the local level, but there are statewide programs that offer assistance to mobile home owners in terms of resiting their mobile homes. It's really tough because in a lot of our mobile home parks, as the senator said, they're not in great locations. But on top of that, there's really aging infrastructure, which is really expensive. So as we're considering our mobile home parks, we really have to consider the infrastructure component. And, mobile home parks, there's a lot of stigma around them. And really, they are the best, most affordable home ownership model that we have out there. They are. Whether we want to recognize that or not, they are. You can be a homeowner for about $60,000 a year for a new manufactured mobile home. That's impossible for a stick-built. So we do have funding that we use to, we help out mobile home parks all the time, but in terms of them being resited, we work with them, but it really takes place on the local level, so it would have to be the...
And one other thing is, I don't know if you could hear because the mic got a little soft, she did talk about the stigma. When I was on the Development Review Board here in Brattleboro, we had a contentious discussion in front of the board one night because there was a mobile home in a neighborhood in essentially downtown Brattleboro. And there was a big discussion about whether that should be allowed to be on that lot. And so we cannot underestimate the very strong feelings that people have about what a legitimate neighborhood is. And I think we need to really confront that stigma head on. Because when I go and talk to the folks who are, as Katie said, homeowners in mobile home parks here in Brattleboro, that's where they want to be and they want assistance in staying there.
I have a follow-up question that's a summary of quite a few questions here, which is really, if folks want to get involved in changing zoning and code to allow for more multifamily units, more clustered housing, how would they make a difference?
Did you see her eyes light up? She's so excited.
Run for local office. Get involved. Join your planning commission. Join. There are too many people who sit on the sidelines. Don't sit on the sidelines. Get involved. The best way to make change is to be the change. Go do it.
And that is a beautiful closing. Thank you, Commissioner Buckley. Thank you, Senator Balint. Can we have a round of applause?